we'll be brief because, just look up, we might get a little drop of rain. And do you want to hear something about the old church first, and then we'll talk about the cemetery?
Yeah.
So I've just written this out, and we put it together, and I'll just read it out in the interest of speed. The old graveyard in Moynalty, a wildlife sanctuary. The old manorial village of Moynalty in the early 1700s consisted of clusters of inferior type homesteads, some of which were located in the vicinity of this burial ground. In their midst there stood a Roman Catholic chapel. Am I all right? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
There stood a Roman Catholic chapel of pre-Norman origin. It was surrounded by this graveyard, which was at that time Catholic only, but not as big as it became when later on it was extended. An aerial view of this land reveals the spot towards the centre where that former chapel stood. In 1790, the chapel was demolished and a Church of Ireland house was built to replace it. This building here, which became the Credit Union office in 1994. The graveyard continued as a burial place, not only for Catholics, but also for Protestants, then laying joint claim to the territory. In 1901, after 200 years serving Moynalty, it was officially closed. Many Catholics and Protestants were buried here side by side between 1800 and 1900 roughly. In 1911, Mrs. Julia O'Brien from Carrickspringen, formerly Julia Fox, was the last person ever buried here. She was my great-grandmother, and my father, incidentally, age 16, was at the funeral. A fee of £30 sterling had to be paid by her son, my granduncle Michael O'Brien from Carrickspringen, for permission to bury her with her family. The Protestant church was built in 1790. Materials used were random rubble bound together with lime and water. Later it was pebble dashed to protect it from weathering under the elements because it was a fairly inferior type stone. The graveyard is about 100 years older than the Protestant church, which is now the Credit Union office, of course. In 1729, Hugh Lynch was buried here, the first documented burial in the graveyard. But the headstones indicate much earlier burials, and you'll see the earlier burials on those maps that you have in your hands. The headstones are an indication of the gap between rich and poor in bygone days. The poor used ordinary hewn local rock, marked with crude lettering done by hammer and chisel. The rich used elaborate slab stones adorned with ornate lettering. There are some tombs or vaults in this graveyard, installed by the richer families of Moynalty and its hinterland. And you'll see them all in their vaults, big slabs, all overgrown. However, in Death the Leveller, the poet James Shirley said that sceptre and crown must tumble down, and in the dust be equal made with the poor crooked scythe and spade. And there's evidence of that here behind us. After the official closure of the graveyard, one deceased person was hoisted over the high wall and buried in secret in the family plot, all in the dead of night. No fee paid, of course. Due to eventual congregational decline and decline also in the wealth of the members of the Church of Ireland, the heavy taxes imposed by the landlord Challoner on the church of so many windows became a problem. It prompted the Protestant rector to have the two big windows built up, the ones by the road, we all remember them, built up. The Credit Union undid that. The diamond glass in the windows, accurately cut by hand, is held in place by lead. This demonstrates an extraordinary skill applied in an age of very poor primitive tools. The arched frames over the windows and the doors and the pinnacles of solid rock on the bell towers confer the notion of 14th century Gothic architecture on the building. And those pinnacles are solid rock and had to be got up there. Just imagine what that was like, those 4 pinnacles, intact. They weren't even put up in parts. They're solid, hewn into the pinnacle points. And they managed to get them up there. That was some feat. Apart from being a hallowed spot where the dead rest in peace, this graveyard is now preserved as a wildlife sanctuary under the auspices of Moynalty Tidy Towns. But of course it's not just Moynalty Tidy Towns, that's a national directive, and I suppose it applies to hedgerows and wild growth along our roads and everything. We can see the whole place becoming overgrown. Birds, insects, small animals, mammals and invertebrates exist undisturbed in here. The introduction of bees to the lower area by the River Barora ensures a healthy pollination process to propagate fruits of the garden and hedgerow. And beware of the bees when you go in there. They're down there and very active. Thousands of them, isn't that right? Thousands. 50,000 in one hive. So 50,000 in one hive, so beware tonight. Azure moss and lichen cling to the headstones, and plenty of ivy too. I was in there today, myself and Paddy, for about 2 hours, and it's very hard to get around in it. A wide variety of grasses flourishes within these ancient walls. Wildweed and wildflower thrive in close harmony in this tranquil place. The following is a list of what might crop up here, and I saw plenty of it today, and far more, ones that are not listed here at all. Pineapple weed, bindweed, mayweed, chickweed, willow herb, sow thistle, vetches, scotch, groundsel, dot, dandelion. Flowers, celandine, that'll be earlier in the year, buttercup, wild rose, convolvulus, ox-eye daisy, cowslip, forget-me-not, cat's paw, foxglove, violets, black-eyed Susie. Grasses, meadowgrass, common bent, plantain, cocksfoot, dog's tail, ryegrass, redshank, white clover, red clover. Didn't see any of it in bloom today, but I've been in there before and it's there. Sedge, red fescue, and a lot more. Added attraction of this wildlife sanctuary is the song of the birds, the flitting of butterflies, but I didn't see any today, movement of small creatures, humming of the bees, lapping of the waters in the river below, and fresh, unpolluted air. We're getting it here tonight. Let's now observe a moment's silence for the departed souls which lie in this sanctuary, many of our ancestors. May they rest in peace. Amen.